Hey guys, welcome to Digit.in, and today we're reviewing one of the three Redmi phones that have just launched in the country. This is the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max. This is the largest of the three variants. We've been testing it out for a few days now, and this video will basically cover everything that we've discovered so far. But before we get into the details, make sure to hit the subscribe button on our channel and of course also hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any future updates from us. With that out of the way, let's begin. First, the basics, and that is the specs of the phone. The Redmi Note 10 Pro Max is powered by the Qualcomm Snapdragon 732G chipset, and it comes with 6GB or 8GB of RAM. This particular unit has 6GB RAM and 128GB of storage, although you could also choose 64GB with the 6 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs with 8GB of RAM. So you've got those multiple variants going on. Other than that, the real cool feature of this phone is the massive 6.67-inch display, which it's an AMOLED display by the way, and has a refresh rate of 120Hz. Super smooth to use, looks very nice. The battery in here is a 5020 mAh unit, which supports fast charging of up to 33 watts, with the charger being included in the box. Last but not the least, we've got a really impressive camera stack as well. It's a 108 megapixel primary camera. This is the Samsung HM2 sensor, along with an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 5 megapixel super macro camera, and of course a depth sensor. On the front, you also get a 16 megapixel selfie camera. So overall, the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max makes a fairly compelling case for itself when it comes to on-paper features. But how does it actually translate into real-world performance? Let's take a closer look. Now, the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max is powered by the Qualcomm Snapdragon 732G chipset. Now, this particular SoC has been in the market for some time now, and given what we're seeing in the market these days, here's how the performance of this phone stacks up. At first glance, you would take a look at maybe like phones like the Oppo F19 Pro Plus 5G, you take a look at the Narzo 30 Pro, and maybe even the Samsung Galaxy F62, and realize that this particular phone, the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max, trails behind all of them when it comes to synthetic benchmarks. So the MediaTek Dimensity 800U SoC does clock higher benchmark numbers when compared to the Snapdragon 732G. Unfortunately, however, we have seen consistently that the 800U is boosting performance when it comes to benchmarks. So we're not really sure if a benchmark to benchmark comparison between the Oppo, Narzo and the Redmi devices would be fair. However, if you do look at the Samsung Galaxy F62, which is powered by a slightly older chipset, the Exynos 9825, some of you may not know of that, the Samsung does outperform the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max. Now, if you don't care about synthetic benchmarks and you just look at what the real world performance of these phones looks like, well, here's a glimpse. We use Gamebench to benchmark the gaming performance of all of our devices, and here's where the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max stands. In Call of Duty Mobile, the phone racks up a median FPS of 58, whereas the stability on it was about 98%. When it comes to Asphalt 9, you get a smooth 30 FPS experience with a stability of again 99%. So gaming on this phone is definitely not an issue. Day-to-day performance, especially when you have the display set to 120Hz, is absolutely smooth. Multitasking is not a problem, and as a daily driver, you really do wonder, do you need a phone more powerful than this one? Well, that's up to you, but that's how reliable the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max's performance has been so far. Now let's talk about the camera, since that's one of the stars of the show here. The 108 megapixel HM2 sensor on the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max does deliver some stellar images in both good light and low light. But here are some details to consider. While the dynamic range is pretty impressive, the colors and contrast is good, there are certain situations where you might look at the colors and say they appear a little oversaturated. This would particularly be the case when looking at the shades and colors of different types of red. The other really cool feature is Night Mode 2.0. The Night Mode 2.0 feature actually does deliver some very impressive images when you're shooting in conditions where there's very little light to work with. Now the detail in these images may not be very impressive, they may not be the most critically sharp images. But when it comes to sharing on social media, or if it's just a memory or a scene that you're trying to capture, the camera does get the job done. Moving on to the 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, you see that again the images in daylight are fairly decent. There is no pronounced fisheye effect, but there is some noticeable distortion around the edges. However, when you move into low light situations, the output is just not as impressive as the primary camera, and that is an expectation that you need to set straight before you get the smartphone. The real star in this camera setup, however, I have to say, is the macro camera, and that's for several reasons. Firstly, the macro lens on the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max bumps up the resolution to 5, whereas everybody else is doing a 2 megapixel sensor. Second thing, this is a macro camera that actually comes with an autofocus motor built in. That actually means you can try to take good macro photos, because this camera will not only focus on the subject but keep the focus locked as well. So while you're going as close as 4 centimeters, you know that your focus is not going to be out, and that also results in images that you can actually use. I mean, 5 megapixels is pretty good resolution. The only downside to this whole equation is that you need to be shooting in very good light, because the sensor in this macro camera is fairly small and the aperture is pretty small as well. So overall, as long as you're shooting in good light, you'll get definitely impressive results, but other than that, don't count on it too much. Last but not least, you've got the depth camera, which contributes to the portrait mode effect. And when looking at shots taken in portrait mode, you can see that the bokeh is pretty nice. It's very pleasing to the eye, although there are some issues with edge detection, especially in particularly tricky situations when it comes to hair or if there's too much happening in the background. Overall, the camera on the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max is very impressive, to say the least. It's one of those units that is reliable across all 3 lenses that are being offered, and they're actually usable, unlike the macro camera on competing devices, where yes, you have a macro camera, but trying to use it is a nightmare. So good job, Redmi, on that one. Next, let's talk about the display and sound on the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max. It's a gorgeous Super AMOLED display, FHD plus resolution, and 120Hz refresh rate. Color accuracy wise, not very impressive, but for day-to-day user, for somebody who just likes to watch content on the go, you're not going to find major problems with color reproduction. You can watch movies in full HD because this phone is Widevine L1 certified, so that's really great. And the 120Hz refresh rate does make the phone appear not just faster, but everything just feels much smoother to be using as well. Thankfully, the phone also features stereo sound because it has dual speakers, both one on top and one at the bottom. And while you're gaming, there is a possibility you're going to clog one of them up because the positioning is slightly off center for both of them. But it's nice to have stereo speakers to begin with than just have a mono sound and have the speaker definitely getting blocked by your hand while you're either watching a movie or playing Call of Duty or something of that sort. Sound output by itself is pretty decent. The speakers are loud, but they're not the best sounding. But at the end of the day, it's usable. It's not the most it's not disappointing, that's for sure, but definitely not iPhone grade either. Next, let's talk about the battery. Now, the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max offers a 5020 mAh battery, which is very similarly sized as last year's Note 9 Pro Max. You get 33-watt fast charging. The charger is included in the box, so that's pretty awesome. In day-to-day usage, as long as you have the phone set to 60 Hz, you can expect easily a day to a day and a half worth of usage with normal usage, heavy usage as well. As long as you're not gaming too much and as long as you're not watching like 6 hours of Netflix, you can easily expect to hit that number. If you switch over to a 120Hz mode, of course, then expect the battery to basically give way by the end of the day. You will need to charge it every night in order to meet your work demands or your usage demands, as heavy as they may be. But overall, it's not that bad because you can also charge the phone back up from 0 to 100 in under 75 minutes thanks to the charger that's included in the box. Now, let's conclude this review. Overall, the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max does make a fairly compelling case for itself at a starting price of 18,999. This particular unit that we have is 19999 because it's the 6GB 128GB storage variant, and for this price you get a Super AMOLED display, 120Hz refresh rate, very impressive cameras for sure, decent battery life, and the only area where it somewhat lags is performance, but it's not actually lacking anything. It's still a good usage experience, and it's still able to play your games at decent FPS with stable frame rates. You're able to do your photo editing, you're able to handle multiple applications and tabs. It's not going to be an issue. As long as you're not really looking at the benchmark numbers of MediaTek powered competing devices, you should feel pretty good about purchasing this device. Now, if you're looking at the Mi 10i, you may think, well, that's also starting at 19,999, 20 grand, you can get it for on the web. It has a better SoC, but at the end of the day, that's a fairly different phone, and it's a completely different device. This is better suited for somebody who's looking for an all-rounder, whereas the Mi 10i is more performance oriented as a smartphone. So I would recommend that you go for the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max. Thank you guys for watching this video, and of course, if you have any questions about the smartphone, leave them in the comment section below and we will definitely get back to them as soon as we can. Thank you guys for watching, and I'm going to see you in the next one. But before you leave, make sure to hit the subscribe button on our channel, and of course also hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any future updates from us.